Hello folks, welcome to Saving Time. My name's David and I'm going to take you through some reasons why I think this piece in front of me is worth saving. Now, the more astute of you may have noticed there's something not quite right with this one. No, it's not a driving watch. It's not held at this angle for any practical reason. In fact, it was given to me as a birthday gift by my significant other. Well, we went out for some adult beverages and I woke up and it was pretty much in the state you see before you. So I'm going to show you some other examples from the manufacturer here, while I go over a little bit about why this watch is not just significant to me, but why Prim, the company that made it, is horologically significant as a whole. My watch is the Prim Diplomat, the one that you previously saw on the bench. It's from 1965. The Czech Republic actually became the 8th country in the world with the technological capability to produce a mechanical watch, right behind Switzerland, Germany, France, the UK, the USA, the Soviet Union, and Japan. So horologically fairly significant. Now, over its 60-year period, Prim, the company, produced over 13 million watches. They were produced in the Czech Republic for two reasons. Production started in around 1957 to 1958, and the reasons they were produced were national defense. You have a whole bunch of soldiers all need to turn up at the same time, and you don't want to rely on another country to provide that technology for you, and also purely for reasons of trade. The Czech Interior Trade Minister figured that they'd need about 250,000 watches every year. So let's get our Prim open here. Now, these watches can be had relatively cheaply. They are horologically significant, in my opinion, and if you want to add one to your collection, it's not that difficult. I'm going to use the rubber ball method here because it doesn't leave tool marks, although this watch is a little beaten up. It is from 1965, so that's not a surprise. And we get our first look at the movement. Now, I'm very happy to see on top of the balance clock an Incabloc setting. Basically a shock setting for the balance staff pivots. That's far less likely that this watch will have become damaged. Here we have a movement ring that should have some sort of gasket in it, but it doesn't. And also, that shouldn't happen. That shouldn't be a thing. So when I got this watch, obviously the winding stem and the crown dropped out. Now, I have a feeling that's because they were loose to begin with, and the watch itself rattled around. I probably shouldn't have worn it, but you know, birthdays being birthdays, adult beverages being adult beverages, well, this is what you get. That movement ring, by the way, should not have just pulled out like that. I'm going to flip the watch upside down so we can start to get a disassembly going here. Now, I have found a winding stem that will allow me to set the time on this at least. But if you look at the crown there, it's from a gold watch and it's incredibly wonky. Obviously, this is not the right crown. It's from a gold-plated watch for a start, and that's not the correct winding stem, although the winding stem does seem to be able to wind and set the watch. I'm going to use a couple of hand levers here to pull off the hands. You can use other tools for this. I like the hand levers. The piece of paper there is just to protect the dial a little bit. You can get like fancy plastic guards that go underneath and all sorts of stuff. Piece of paper works okay for me. I'm going to put the hands in the dial box. Dial boxes are a couple of quid each. Very much recommended if you're going to get into this as a hobby. They'll hold the dial secure for you while you work on the rest of the watch. They don't actually let the dial touch anything because the paint on dials can be fragile. Now, to get the dial off, you'll have to undo some dial foot screws here. There's normally two of those around the edge of the watch. There's various other methods, but in general, I'd say a good percentage of watches use just dial feet that are held on by dial screws. So you can see the dial has gone in the box there, and I'm going to take off the hour wheel here and the dial spring, the dial washer. The reason to take this off is they're pretty much one of the only parts of the movement that's not secured in place. If you put it watch in a movement holder like I've done to work on it, that will just fall off the other side and you'll end up losing it. I know from experience. Now, the first thing I want to do with a watch is to make sure there's no power in it. The way to do that is to move aside the click here and to unwind any power from the mainspring using the ratchet wheel. I'm not actually turning that, I'm just allowing the power from the spring to gradually wind itself out. The reason the screwdriver's there is so it doesn't happen all at once, because that'd be a bad day for you. First thing is to take the balance out, the balance complete. And the reason I do this is because it's very fragile and I don't want to damage it. I am a hobbyist, not a dyed-in-the-wall, ancient watchmaker. So I take every precaution I can take to make sure that I don't do more harm than good. So the balance is coming out. Now I can take the click off and I can start the disassembly proper. So I'm going to take the click off first because I really want to get a look at how the click spring is organized on this thing. Anytime you have a spring on a watch, there is a huge propensity for it to spring across the other side of the universe. They're tiny and extremely difficult to find. So this click spring is a nice and easy one. It's not really held with much tension, so you can just go ahead and pop it out. Very little chance of that going, into the next planetary orbit. I'm going to take off the ratchet wheel here. If you want to see some springs jumping about with the greatest of ease and some, let's just say, upset watchmaker, you can watch my first video, which I'll link up in one of the corners, where you will actually see me, have to beep out quite a bit. Right, so the ratchet wheel is going to come out here. I should be able to turn my attention now to the crown wheel. Now you'll notice that the crown wheel has an unusual screw with two parallel lines running across it. This is to denote that it's reverse threaded, just to stop it unscrewing as the watch winds itself, or as you wind the watch. Let's take off the train bridge here. Now that screw you see in the center of the train bridge isn't actually part of the train bridge. It was a screw to hold the movement ring in place, which was not screwed in at all. We're also missing a movement ring screw, so I'm just going to touch that and it just drops out. That's not a good sign. We'll persevere, so I'm going to take off the other train bridge screw here, and then I shall be levering up the train bridge to get at the train of wheels. So easy enough. If you watched my first video, you'll have seen that I did a Russian watch, a Kiriovsky to be precise, from the 1950s. A little older than this one. I will say that just from a relative comparison between the Czech and Soviet, I've done a few of both. So center seconds wheel coming out. The Czech takes it in terms of design, niceness of fit and finish. That wheel that just came out was the center seconds wheel. That directly drives the second hand on the watch, called a sweep second. Now this wasn't common up until around 1940, because if you look at the gear train of a watch, you can simply extend the pivot of the fourth wheel, which I'll point out to you, and stick a second hand on it, which gives you a small second, which is a second in a subdial at normally 6 o'clock, which you might have seen. That center second hand that's ubiquitous really didn't come about until mass produced, until Zenith and the Caliber 133 in the 1940s. Takes extra gearing to get the wheel, to get the seconds in the center, instead of, at the 6 o'clock position. So out comes the barrel bridge here, off comes the barrel bridge, and out comes the barrel complete, or the first wheel. There are various different names for these things. Out comes the intermediate wheel, just due to the tradition of watchmaking in many different countries. So I'm going to take the bridge off that holds the center wheel, not to be confused with the center seconds wheel. And the center wheel will actually be secured to this movement via the cannon pinion on the other side of the watch. So you won't be able to take it out before you remove the cannon pinion on the dial side. This bridge here doesn't appear to have any nice slot for how to take it out, so I'm going to leave it for the minute, and I'm going to take out the pallet bridge here so I can get the pallet fork out. With a bridge that doesn't appear to be easy to take off, one thing you can try is just to turn the watch upside down and see if it falls off. There may also be a place for your screwdriver on the other side of the watch, so if you're working on one side, flip it up. There might be a way to just knock that bridge out from the other side of the watch. You don't want to get in there with a screwdriver like it's a crowbar, and if you have to do something with a lot of force, you're probably not doing it right. There probably is a better way. The people that design these things generally had a right to repair mentality, if you like. Watches have to be serviced, so they have to come apart and go back together. So I'm going to take out the stem here with the crown, the wrong crown, as you can see, and I can remove the sliding pinion and the winding pinion. One just fell out the bottom, but there you can see. As to getting that bridge out, there's a hole in the back that looks like I can just press that and the bridge just pops out. We can turn our attention now to the dial side of the watch, where we have the motion works and the keyless works. You can also see there's an Incabloc setting or a shock setting on the back side of the watch for the bridge, for the balance pivots also. Let's take off this cover plate, which will let us get our minute wheel and our intermediate setting wheel. Really, I have to say this watch is nice to work on too. This movement, the Prim Caliber 66, is fairly ubiquitous for Prim. There are probably 50 or 60 watches that all share the same movement. So out comes our intermediate setting wheel and our minute wheel. And now I can take off this cover plate with integrated spring that's connected to our set lever here. This is our keyless works, which were believe kind of co-invented by Jaeger-LeCoultre and Patek Philippe. I think Patek did the first iteration with LeCoultre doing some of the refinement, although don't quote me on that one. To be able to get this, there's another cover plate here that just holds everything in place, so I'm going to take that out, as well as the cover plate that's connected to our set lever. So again, they're all part of the keyless works. And if you didn't know, watches used to be wound with a key, so you'd have a separate device that you put in to wind and set the time. Keyless works just refers to the fact that this is the part of the watch used to set the time and wind the watch, and it doesn't require a key. Now there you can see yoke and a yoke spring, and part of why I really like working on this movement is a lot of the springs are held captive. Like this spring, there's very little chance it's going to go flying off on you. Very nice to work with. So there's our yoke spring. And it's just a flat bar too. So if you do lose this one, it's very easy to replace. And here's our yoke coming out. It doesn't have a weird shape to it. That just leaves our set lever, and it actually has the button for taking the stem in and out connected to it. So it's all in one piece, and it's incredibly dirty. We'll get rid of that. I mean, it goes without saying that this watch is filthy. So this is a cannon pinion remover. This is just a cheapy one, but it does the job. And that will just pull the cannon pinion off, which is press fit to the center wheel there. So that will pull both of those things out without too much damage. I'm going to put this watch in little baskets, but before I do that, I normally like to lay all the parts out and do a visual inspection. And if you're wondering about that barrel, I am going to remove the spring from it and lube it and put it back together, but I'm going to do that by hand, and it's genuinely frowned upon. Next video, I will have some watch winders and we can do it properly then. Cleaning is quite simple. They just go into glass jars, the little baskets. The main plate is on there with the complete balance on it. And I'm just using Elmer watch cleaning, waterless cleaning products. These are specifically designed for mechanical watches, and we go into a bog standard, cheapest chips ultrasonic cleaner. And I'll be back when all that's done. Okay, we are back from the cleaners, looking significantly shinier than we went in. That Elmer waterless cleaning solution, absolutely would recommend it. It's a little expensive, but you don't use a lot, so it'll last for a while. Now I'm going to take the balance complete out just to protect it during the reassembly. I put it back in for cleaning for the same reason. I don't want that hairspring getting tangled in other components. So there's the balance complete out, which will go on a little balance holder, so again it doesn't get tangled. I'm going to show a little more of the oiling than I did last time. I still have no proper way to show you the magnification. I'm going to try this. The oiling might be a little scuff. Try and sort it out, but I'm definitely going to try and show you guys a little more of the oiling. Center wheel's going in. I'm going to oil the underside of our barrel here. Now, I disassembled the barrel off camera because I wound the spring in by hand, and that's really not recommended. So I should have some mainspring winders for the next video. So I hope to show you the process a bit better. I really don't want to show the wrong way to do it. I'll get the barrel back in. I'm going to put this little bridge in here that contains our center wheel. Now this bridge is very, very form fitted, but it does push down with a fairly gentle effort. I'm just going to make sure those wheels are interfaced together, the first wheel and the center wheel there, or the barrel and the center wheel. The barrel being called the first wheel, sometimes referred to. Because of the way horology grew up in many different countries, there are a few standardized names for different parts of a watch. So if you hear me calling them something and somebody else calling them something else, it doesn't necessarily mean one of us is wrong. One of us might be using, say, the terms from the German tradition of watchmaking and another from the Swiss tradition. Well, let's get that bridge screwed on. I mean, or one of us could just be wrong. So there in goes our intermediate wheel there. So that should all interface together. You'll see me at several points just spin this to make sure that everything spins nicely together. I'm also still kind of fascinated to see the little wheel spin around like a small child, if I'm honest. So the center second wheel goes in. This is the wheel that the center seconds hand will directly connect to. There we go, and I'll make sure that spins again, probably with a childish sense of delight, just to see the little wheels go wee. Right, so I'm going to get the escape wheel back in, because it lives under the train bridge in this case. I mean, it normally does, but you want to be a little careful with this. It's got to fit into a pivot down there. It can be tricky. I've tried not to, as I said last time, I've tried not to edit these videos to make me look like I'm some sort of excellent watchmaker. But I did cut a lot of the tedium out because, you know, getting things like this bridge on, for instance, the train bridge here, can take genuinely minutes. Like you could be here for 15 minutes. You cannot just plonk it on there and push down and hope everything lines up. In the case of this Prim, the bridge actually did go on this easy. I mean, that was it. I was removing a tiny, minute hair, and the bridge just slid into place. So once the bridge is fitted and all the pivots coming through the jewels, you can do a quick spin of the wheels again, just to make sure everything is nicely seated. Make sure all of those wheels are spinning, including the escape wheel. And then I'm going to not tighten the bridge fully. I'm going to tighten it most of the way, do another check, and then tighten it fully. You might think I'm a little paranoid here, and indeed I might be, but this wouldn't be the first pivot I've crushed, as when I've been screwing it in, one of the pivots has slipped, and then I've, forcefully tightened it, and ended up with a watch that needed a replacement part. Here we go again. And seems to be fine, so I go ahead and tighten that up now. The third screw hole you can see there is actually to secure the movement ring. It's got nothing to do with the bridge. So our pallet fork here, and I need to oil one of the jewels. So again, I'm trying this without much magnification, and you can see here that jewel gets oiled. You really don't want too much oil on this. It shouldn't slop over the sides of the pallet jewel. And you only want to oil the one pallet jewel there. There's no need to oil both. I'm using a bit of Radico here. Watchmakers Blue Tack do not use Blue Tack. It's not the same thing at all. It'll leave residue, oil and gunk all over your parts. So buy Radico. Bergeon sell it. One of the things that Bergeon actually sell that isn't that expensive. It's like 3 times the price of Blue Tack, but it's a couple of bucks. So don't cheap out on the Radico. I believe other manufacturers sell it. I could be wrong on that. I'm getting the pallet fork here back on with the pallet bridge. And this really is where you want to be extra careful, because the pallet fork also has pivots top and bottom. But it's traditional not to oil the pivots, I believe, because it's not spinning around. It's doing a small side-to-side motion. A little bit more oil, and in this case the pallet fork was nice and secure. So I'm going to turn my attention to the barrel here. I'm just going to add a little bit of oil before I put the barrel bridge on. So barrel bridge going on. It's a little tricky on this watch, so I'm just using a bit of pegwood. I don't really want to go pushing at it with a pair of tweezers in case I scratch it. Here we have some oil for the top of the barrel arbor, and that's going to interface there with our ratchet wheel. Some oil for the clip. First, it looks like I decided to do the oiling before putting the wheels on. Right, some oil here for the crown wheel, because that's metal on metal, it's going to spin. And I'm also going to put some oil on the base of the crown wheel plate here, because I noticed a lot of wear on the crown wheel itself. I'm just going to add some lubrication. Now, all the oils I am using are Mobius. I believe the one I'm using right now is HP 1300. I'll start to link the stuff I used in the description, just in case it's of interest to any of you. Fit our crown wheel there, and again our screw, which is reverse threaded. So be careful on that one, because it is very easy to snap these by doing them the wrong way. I am going to, which I probably should have done in the first place, screw the barrel down, barrel bridge down. I'm going to work on camera settings for these videos, because I feel like my video is okay, but I could definitely get it a bit nicer. If you want to comment on anything, by the way, please do. This is all brand new to me, so any suggestions you might have, either pertaining to watchmaking or filming, just let me know in the comments. I'd be very happy to hear from you, being brand new here on the platform. Right, so the barrel bridge is screwed down, which will now let me put the click and click spring back in. Now, as I said before, I like this particular design of click spring. It just interfaces real easily. It's not under tension when you're putting in the watch. The chance of it going boing is fairly minimal, although it does happen. So now the click spring on, I have to make sure the click interfaces with the spring here. So there you can see a little strand of spring sticking up. I can already tell by watching the video back, because I'm voicing these over. Obviously, I'm not doing it while I'm actually fixing the watch. I can already tell that's the wrong screw for the click spring. It's not actually holding, sorry, for the click. It's not actually holding the click in place. I've made a mistake. I left it in the video because they happen, and I wanted to show you the troubleshooting step. When I screw down the ratchet wheel here and attempt to wind the watch, you'll see the click rattle and jump about. Something very obviously wrong with it. So you see there where the click's kind of jumped in the air? This is not a good sign. It means the screw is too small. I've taken the smaller screw out and the bigger screw is going on, which will hold that click nice and securely in place. So this is the first Prim caliber 66 I am working on. I'm putting some wind into the watch, and I'm going to just check the pallet fork here is jumping nicely backwards and forwards, which indeed it does appear to be. That's a very good sign at this stage. This is the first Prim caliber 66 I've worked on, and I have to say I am kind of thoroughly impressed for a mass-produced watch of this type. It's very nice to work on, very easy. I'm oiling the top jewels here for the gear train. I'll oil the bottom ones off camera because it's more of the same. It's worth noting that there are a set of jewels on the bottom as well as the top for the bottom pivots. Again, I tried to do the best I could there with the magnification I've got, and as we go along, I already feel like I am starting to improve with these, so hopefully we'll get better as time goes by. Now we're on the dial side of the watch, so I'm going to introduce a little oil for our minute wheel here, and I'll also need to oil various things in the keyless and motion works, the motion works being what we're on now. I'm going to oil probably the intermediate setting wheel next. Yep. So that's the post for the intermediate setting wheel. Okay, now we can add a little oil to our center wheel pivot here that our cannon pinion will be press fit to. So now that oil is added, I can come in and add the cannon pinion. I'm going to push it down with a pair of brass tweezers and it should snap directly into place. Minute wheel is going back on here. Now the hour wheel will go on last. You want to put the cannon pinion on before you have the minute wheel in there because you're press fitting it, so it's very easy to snap one of the teeth off the minute wheel. Intermediate setting wheel going on right now, and the cover plate that covers up the minute wheel and the intermediate setting wheel. So these screws, by the way, are tiny. I'm going to give you a sense of the scale here. So there is one of the screws. So when you see this on camera, everything looks quite ginormous because we are quite zoomed in at a macro level, but that's basically the size you're looking at, the scale you're working with. It's kind of interesting if you've never seen that in context. All right, let's get those screws in. This will just stop basically our minute wheel and our intermediate setting wheel falling out of the watch. Which wouldn't be good because we need those. Right, second microscopic screw going in. And there we go. Now we can turn our attention here to the winding pinion. I'm going to add a little oil to this. Now I'm using HP 1300. A lot of the time for this I'll use Mobius 8200. It's a heavier grease. I've seen both used. I'm not sure what's correct nowadays, like what would be the gold standard. But anyway, the clutch or the sliding pinion is going back in, and I've oiled the teeth on the other side of that too. So I've put the winding stem back in, the wrong one, but it'll help hold everything secure. Here is some heavier duty grease going on our set lever here. This grease, I want to say is Mobius 8200. I'm pretty sure it is. It's in the Mobius 8000 series of natural greases. You can get a synthetic grease now, which is longer lasting. I just happen to have some of the Mobius 8000 series. It's good stuff. Maybe if you were servicing high-end watches for clients, you'd want to move over to make sure all of the oil was synthetic. But in our case, like the Mobius oil is very good. Even the 8000 series. So I'll set lever going back in here. And as you can see, that's working. I'm just pulling the staff in and out. So I'm going to start putting some of the cover plates back on so we can start to get this keyless works built. And again, I'm going to draw the parallel between the watch that I worked on last week, which will be linked up in the corner. This is much nicer. The design, to my eye at least, is far more elegant. It's definitely a lot easier from a watchmaking standpoint to take this boy apart, clean it, and put it back together. I would say there are far less pitfalls to fall into, and the build quality of overall components, although this is a mass-produced movement, it's not hand, finished or anything like you might see on a high-end Swiss or German or Japanese piece. It is very, very nice to work on, and the components used in it, they're very serviceable. They have, obviously had some love and attention given to them. And I would genuinely recommend, if you're looking for an old vintage watch, a Prim with the caliber 66 movement in it. It's easy to work on, it's easy to service. And if you're thinking about getting into this as a hobby, they're cheap enough to buy. Now, the Diplomat and the Ala Diplomat are quite expensive. You can pay upwards of $500 for these. But there are, as I showed in the beginning of the video, there are many Prims that can be had for well under $100. So, nice thing to add to your collection. So I'm just reassembling the keyless works here. You saw me put in the the clutch and the the yoke and the yoke spring, and now I'm putting on the cover plate with the integrated spring that interfaces with our set lever. So I'm just going to make sure that everything is in the right place. There you go, see that clip into place, and I can finish screwing that cover plate back down. I'm going to add a little oil here where there's metal on metal contact, and again I think I'm using the Mobius grease, the heavy duty stuff. So last screw in for our cover plate. And that should be pretty much our keyless works built up. So as I said, this watch has been a joy. And there you go, give that a test, make sure everything is working, make sure the keyless works is interfacing properly with the motion works, make sure we can wind the watch, make sure everything is popping backwards and forwards as it should, and that's kind of smooth as butter at this point. So we need to put the balance back in the watch, of course, to make sure everything is ticking. Now we could have done this before we built up the other side of the watch, but let's have a moment of suspense here. And this should pop in and start ticking. I had some trouble getting this back in. Sometimes it happens. It was a bit of a struggle, nothing too bad. But I'm going to put that on there and give it a little blow with some air to make sure the pivots have fallen in the right place. And you can see the watch springs up with what looks like a fairly decent amount of horsepower, although it's not fully wound at the moment. So there we go, everything is ticking. I'm going to screw the balance back down, and then we're going to deal with the Incabloc settings, which, as I mentioned, are anti-shock settings to stop the watch suffering any shock. Very common on a mechanical watch that you knock it and one of the pivots stops. The Incabloc on the top of the balance cock here is to stop that. So we're going to take a look at that now. Okay, let's look at disassembling this Incabloc. Now there's a little captive spring here that's holding the jewel setting down. Now the Incabloc setting was invented in around 1934 by Georges Braunschweig and Fritz Marty. Just for once, I would like someone called Jane Smith or Joe Smith to invent something, so I don't have to embarrass myself on the internet. But you can see here that captive spring comes up. We can now remove the jewel and the setting. I'm going to use a piece of Radico to do this. Just a nice easy way to pop it out. Now they'll probably come in one piece, but it is actually two pieces, which I'll show you now. So there's the cap jewel and there's the jewel setting. Now this is going into Bergeon B-dip for a quick cleaning. Used to be called Bergeon 1-dip, I believe. You can use a variety of things, that's just what I use. Now I want to oil this jewel and I'm going to hold it with a pair of tweezers. Because if you don't, the capillary action of the oil will actually suck the jewel onto your oiler and you'll be in for a bad time. Now, it goes without saying, once again, these parts are tiny, but I'll do a quick zoom out here so you can see just how tiny. And I probably got a bit much oil on that looking back at it on the video. Now, that's not a good placement from me. You should drop that straight down. I mean, no harm done in this case, but you really don't want to be inaccurate with things like this. You really want to get that dropped straight on the pivot. But there we go, we're back in. Pivot's in. I checked it under higher magnification. And we can go ahead and drop down the spring that holds the whole setting in place. This allows the watch to have a little bit of flex to it when it gets knocked, so it won't snap the pivots on the balance there, on the balance stem. There's another one of these settings at the bottom of the watch, which I'm going to do off camera, because it's exactly the same as this one. Same spring, same setting. Our spring there took a bit of a smudge, so I'm going to use a piece of Radico to give it a quick polish. And we are pretty much back together with this watch. Now we still need to put it in a case, and we still have one very big problem, which is our movement ring and our winding stem here. Now our winding stem does work to both wind and set the watch, but I cannot have a crown that wonky and that colour on this watch. So that's a gold crown on a silver watch. Now I'll put the stem in a pin vise, which is just a little vise to hold it secure, and you can see that crown does screw off, and you could see there how wonky it is. I found a silver crown that kind of suits the watch. It was from a Prim, so it is the correct brand, and I'm just going to screw that one on there. And it's a little rustic, shall we say, But then the watch as a whole is not in perfect condition, and in my opinion would look a little strange with a slightly beat up case but a completely pristine crown on it. So this one suits the style of the watch, and it is from Prim. To come in here and put our hour wheel back on along with our dial washer or spring washer, so we can get the dial back on the watch. And you'll notice that the pivot holes for the train of wheels are next to the hour wheel there. I've oiled those off camera too, because it's exactly the same procedure from oiling those as it is for oiling the top ones. So get the dial back on, get the little dial feet lined up with their respective holes, and we can secure that, make sure it's completely pushed down, that it's flush, and we are going to then just do up those dial feet screws to make sure the dial doesn't come whizzing off the watch. From here we can get the hands back on. Now the first hand position isn't that important. You might want to line it up with 12 o'clock just to save yourself a bit of work. But if you put this hand on and it's wonky, you can just simply use the setting mechanism of the watch to put it to 12 o'clock or any hour. All you want to make sure is the hour hand and the minute hand are in alignment, so when the hour is 3 o'clock the minute hand will be pointing directly at 12, or the hour is 4 o'clock, it doesn't matter, but you want to make sure that on the hour the minute hand is pointed in the right direction. This can be a little fiddly. I'd really like to get a proper press for this. I use a hand tool, and for whatever reason, I just can't seem to get on with it that well. I do the job, but I always feel a little uncomfortable when doing it. So I'm going to maybe invest in a press in the future. They're not that expensive, but again, money's not exactly growing on trees these days, I'm sure, for any of us. So. Now, if you're wondering why the hand looks a little off, it's because there was about a couple of minutes in between the last scene and this one. So the hand isn't actually off, it's just moved because of the passage of time, which is a good thing because that's what we want it to do. So I'll get the second hand on here, just lightly press it, and you'll notice I'm using plastic tweezers. You can also use wooden tweezers for this. You just want to avoid scratching the hands. Now, I will use a piece of Radico to remove any dust and dirt from the hands, but it won't be polishing these, because it would look a little funny. Again, the same thing with a perfect crown. Perfect hands on an old watch just don't sit right with me. Winding the watch now, or setting the time on the watch, I want to make sure the hands at no point bump into each other. Now you can see here this blue ring. I actually 3D printed this out of TPE material. It can be very difficult to track down old gaskets for watches like this, especially stuff that's not Swiss or German. Now you can find the gaskets, but I decided to 3D print this one. So this, I said, the material is TPE. It's kind of rubberized material. And I took a time lapse here of my 3D printer printing this gasket. Now this is not optimal. Obviously you would want a new old stock gasket from the manufacturer, but good luck finding that one. So this is a relatively simple design. It's a flat gasket with a cutout for where the setting lever, for where the winding stem goes, so you don't compress the winding stem and make the watch difficult to set. So that was my Sorojon 3D printing for this watch. I had to print a couple of different versions of this at different heights, but it really wasn't that difficult. And the TPE material really is quite nice to work with for things like gaskets. It's like a kind of a very firm, solid rubber. Again, not as good as an original gasket, of course, but will do in a pinch, and this watch certainly needs that gasket to stop it rattling around in the case. So I'm just using a crystal lift here to put the crystal back in the watch. It's just a device that grabs the edge of the crystal, compresses it slightly, so you can throw it in the case. Now I've put the movement with the dial on it in its movement ring, and I'm going to put that right way up in the case. And no real elegant way I've found to do this, so I'm going to slide it over to the edge of the desk and just pop the whole thing upside down. So you can see we've got our movement ring back in the watch. That is where our rubber gasket will have to be fitted. I've put the crown and winding stem back in the watch to check they fit. They do. And now I'm going to fit our gasket. I'm going to pay special attention to the low point in the gasket. The kind of cutout in the gasket goes where the winding stem is. And you can see this TPE material here is very rubbery, just like a proper gasket would be. If I'm being honest here, I probably printed this one a few microns high I'll probably do another one that's a little bit lower down in the case, but this one does work. It serves its purpose. So I switched to brass tweezers because right now I need to stretch this, and my very, very sharp, pointy DuPont tweezers were just digging into the rubber. So you can see our gasket goes on. I decided to print it in bright blue. Kind of like when you do a historical reconstruction, you want the new materials to look substantially different from the old ones. Like, I'm not trying to fake a gasket here. I want that to stand out, that this has been an addition to the watch. It's not terribly significant, but, you know, I think it's a nice touch. And also, I think the blue of the gasket actually looks quite nice when you open this movement up. Definitely something you wouldn't have traditionally seen on this. Now, I need to make sure my caseback goes on correctly, and I can still set my watch, and my watch can still be wound, and it's ticking away quite nicely. I give it a little shake there, because when I got this watch, like I say, without that gasket, the watch would just rattle and shake around. I did find another screw to secure the movement ring, so it now has 2 screws. And I'm going to put a strap on this. I have this burgundy kind of faux lizard thing lying around, which I quite like the look of. And I'm just going to use a strap tool to get the strap on. Changing a strap on a watch, if you've never done it before, is really rather simple. And the tool I'm using for this costs literally a couple of bucks. You can get them on Amazon. Just search for strap removal or strap fitting tool. I know nowadays you can get those ones with, you know, the quick release, but you really don't need it. Here's a couple of shots of this watch on wrist. I am best pleased with it, that I can get it back out the drawer. I think the crown suits it. It's original Prim. It's about the same wear as the watch here. The watch is ticking away quite nicely. I had it on wrist for a few days at this point, and we are gaining and losing almost nothing. Now, as I stated in the previous video, some dude in a rowboat is on the way with my time grapher, or my second time grapher at the moment, but that's still not here. I'm going to have to leave you with my assurance that it works. I will do, when that turns up for the next video, I'll bug it on there at the start so you can have a look for yourself. But I'm best pleased with this. It's a little damaged, it's a little broken, but then aren't we all? And it is old. It's a beautiful watch. It was a beautiful gift. So if you've stuck with me this long, folks, I'd love to thank you all for joining me here on Saving Time. Do all the YouTube stuff. You know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe, dislike if you don't like it, of course. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much for joining me.